Marijuana, weed, sticky icky dope, Mary Jane. Whatever you call it, cannabis has been around since 2800 BC and it's here to stay. But there are still many misconceptions about the plant that have led to social inequity and become a tool to target Black and brown Americans. A 2020 analysis by the American Civil Liberties Union concluded that historically, Black people are more than 3.5 times more likely than white people to be arrested for marijuana possession, despite similar usage rates. With a prison for you and a profit for me mentality within the cannabis industry, rapper and activist Killer Mike teamed up with Weedmaps and Wheelhouse Labs to create a canna-friendly docuseries entitled Tumbleweeds. Killer Mike is one of the most outspoken supporters of the cannabis movement to build positive inclusivity and community, so I sat down with him to find out more. Creating real systemic change is a continuous journey that requires us to always keep taking steps forward, no matter how big or how small. This is the work in progress. For starters, kind of give us a little bit of a background on the series Tumbleweeds, your involvement, and what that series means to you.
I got a call from a friend, the director, Tony, that was like, hey, man, how'd you like to do a show where you get paid well and you get paid to encourage small business, expose people to cannabis supporters, and talk to comedians and eat great food and travel? And I was just like, I absolutely love the idea of people having an opportunity to not only expose small business that's growing out of cannabis, not just marijuana smokers, but businesses that are growing from comedy clubs to pizza shops. And I think that having an opportunity to talk to cannabis advocates, people that are in it to end legislation that puts people in prison for years they don't deserve to be, people who are pro-legislation for war veterans and veterans to be able to use cannabis for PTSD as an alternative to some of the harder pharmaceutical drugs. It just was a dream job because kind of like Killer Mike, you get entertained, but you get edutained too. You learn something along the way. I learned a lot along the way. And I'm very happy to have been asked to do it. I'm very happy I had the time to.
You almost can't say Killer Mike without saying activism. Where did that come from? Like, where was that instilled in you?
Man, my grandmother, my grandmother, my do for selfness is from both my grandparents. My grandfather and grandmother were very active in the community in different ways. My grandmother was very active politically, meaning the neighborhood unit meetings, the meeting with your city council people, the pushing the line on the mayor to make sure that our neighborhood was treated fairly.
Your grandparents' issues and the things that they were fighting for or fighting against are probably a little bit different or slightly changed from what you are actively involved in today.
No, it's all the same shit. Ain't much change in the last 60
say
years.
More, say more.
Yeah, my grandfather, I can remember thinking marijuana was a bad thing. My grandmother was a devout Christian, so she wasn't big on marijuana. But her daughter, my mom, smoked. My mom's a lifelong smoker. She had a baby at 16 who was born on 420. That's me. I can remember seeing my grandfather when we were in Eatonton, Georgia, in his hometown. My mom and my cousin Liz, God bless the dead, who just died. They were looking for some reefer. That's what they called it at the time. And I can remember my grandfather pulling some out of his tackle box and giving it to them. And I was like, oh shit. Like, I was used to my grandfather having like moonshine, like illegal weed, whiskey, but I didn't know he was pro marijuana, and what he told me about marijuana is that, it's basically harmless, but anything you overindulge in, it's not good for you. But, and then when I learned why marijuana was illegal, you look at 1937, when they prohibited marijuana in America, the way and the propaganda they used, that it caused white women to want to sleep with black men. And it was, the jazz scene was a pathway to marijuana and thus heroin. It was ridiculous stuff. And the reason I say not much has changed is because what we see here is kids still being able to be locked up for marijuana. I remember talking to Ben from Ben and Jerry's, and he told me he got caught with marijuana on the beach as a kid. And he said, if I wasn't a white kid, that cop wouldn't have let me go, and my life would have went radically different. And radically different means we never end up with chocolate chunks from Ben and Jerry's. You know what I mean? So for me, I'm fighting much of the same fight that my grandparents, my grandmother in particular, fought, and that's for fairness and equity in terms of social treatment around, social norms that may be looked at as, low-hanging fruit in terms of entertainment and stuff, whether it be marijuana or whiskey that your brother-in-law brews instead of buying out of the store. So I'm pushing the line, just like craft brewers push the line to brew their own beer again. I'm pushing the line to make sure that Americans, can grow their own smoke, brew their own whiskey. And besides that, I'm pushing the line to make sure that sentencing is fair, and that we get done with sentencing for small amounts of marijuana and even large amounts. Like, I don't care if you have 4 or 40 pounds. Marijuana as a plant hasn't caused much destruction or hurt to people. So, I just want to see marijuana laws become more fair. And I want to see Black people, the people who much of this industry is built on, Black and brown people, because you count Mexicans were villainized as well in reference to marijuana. I wish to see us be a part of this industry.
I also spoke with the president of Wheelhouse Labs, Dan Sanborn, who partnered with Weedmaps on the series to break down stigmas, normalize cannabis, and broaden its audience.
For years, just the stigma surrounding cannabis has been, between the war on drugs, insane incarceration rates, the perception of cannabis has been so tilted and so slanted. And there's a number of different ways we're working with Weedmaps, but one of the ideas that we came up with together was this concept for Tumbleweeds, right? You've seen the shows that talk about how cannabis is grown. You've, of course, seen these dark shows that talk about the demon weed. We wanted to create something that was actually more fun and engaging. How do you take what's actually happening in culture, whether it's food, entertainment, comedy, fashion, and bring it to life and understand and show the cross-section of cannabis with those parts of culture. And so that was how we came up with the concept of Tumbleweeds. And then we were blessed and fortunate as we thought about who would be a perfect host, really no one better than Killer Mike. He's obviously, beyond being a prolific activist and a prolific rapper in his own right, he's obviously very outspoken on this topic of cannabis, and in particular social equity and social justice around it. And we just thought he'd be a great, engaging host. And so all of those worlds came together through serendipity, and we were pleased to launch the show on 4/20 to much acclaim.
Yeah, look, I love it, right? And I think the interesting part of it is getting the tone right. You mentioned the spectrum of storytelling, from the doom and gloom to, oh, look, here's how it's made. But then when you have this legalization and a social justice angle, to get the tone right so that it doesn't alienate people, like, tell us a little bit about the crafting of the storytelling.
Yeah, I think, look, what we do anytime that we come up with a show, whether it's a piece of marketing for a brand or a piece of entertainment, we want to put ourselves in the audience, right? And understand what are going to delight people, or strike an emotion around people. And if we're going to really change the narrative, of course, there's going to be those moments where a serious story does matter as it relates to cannabis, but we wanted to create something fun and engaging that would show a different side of the category that others might, not have seen. Everyone's become accustomed to hearing about wine and how great it goes with food, and how a great trip to Napa or the Bordeaux region of France. Why does cannabis have to be any different than that when you understand what the actual product is and the role that it represents in culture? And so that was sort of where we came up with that lane. And a big tribute to Weedmaps too, right? I think sometimes brands, when they get in this space, will come in with a very heavy hand. For them, they really wanted to do something that would delight, whether it was a current consumer or potentially a future one. And so I give them a lot of credit for being open to a different type of storytelling scene.
If you didn't know, Weedmaps is one of the original online marketplaces for cannabis consumers and businesses. COO and CMO at Weedmaps, Juanjo Fejo, explained why they have always been committed to elevating voices that power the cannabis community, drive social equity, and further legalization.
Market with both doctors and dispensaries. And the founders, I think, really took a view of being true to the plant and being respectful of what the culture meant, right? So there's a big focus on telling the story of breeders, of having kind of like information that was accurate and easily digestible for people who are approaching the market. And that always comes with with a vein of activism. You're, at the end of the day, you're fighting a multi-billion-dollar say no to drugs campaign that was run in the US, and it's a pretty steep hill to climb, especially when you have restricted outlets in terms of telling your story. So activism has always been a part of what we do, whether that's on the public affairs team with, very, very active kind of like government relations team, and then through marketing as well. I look back through the years, we ran our Weed Facts campaign, I think in 2016, 2017, which was, pretty interesting. we basically threw up billboards in states that weren't yet legal with just putting facts about weed, people for them to really understand what it would mean to legalize cannabis, right? And I think it's always been part of who we are, and I think we definitely try to pull that through in every major marketing campaign that we run.
2008 was such a long time ago, and
the
world has changed a little bit, I would imagine. And how do you vet, especially in like an industry that's still growing? No pun intended. But yeah, how do you keep that lens on who's going to be a valid partner?
Most of our relationships are with organizations that have been consistent and true to their mission for 5, 6, 10 years, or in cases longer, right? Organizations like Normal have obviously been doing what they're doing for a lot longer than that. And so I think for us it's been about, we want to support everybody, but then we double down when we see that the values of these organizations are aligned with our own.
So Juanjo, under the guise of the work in progress, what work do you still think needs to be done in the industry, whether it's through Weedmaps or through other organizations out there?
Upwards of 70% for medical use in many states. And I think cannabis is one of those issues where clearly the will of the people is ahead of the will of legislators. I think legislators are at times using cannabis as a prop more so than as an issue that they're really taking seriously. And so I think the more that we can mobilize voters to get politicians to realize that cannabis is a real issue that people really care about, that it's not just that there's support, but that it's something that matters to people, I think we'll be able to get significantly greater advancement in states legalizing both medical and adult use programs across the country. I think the second piece, though, is making sure that as that legalization happens, it happens the right way.
The thing that surprised me most about this conversation is that it still takes a village to end the stigma and the issues around legalization in cannabis. I mean, you've got Wheelhouse Labs, you've got Weedmaps, you've got Vice, you've got Killer Mike, you've got a lot of effort and energy that's still going into the storytelling and the normalization behind the cannabis issues. And this is something that's been around since before Jesus. So I'm thankful to have had this conversation. When it comes to the idea of the work in progress, there's still a ton of work to be done. Honestly, I feel like conversation is number one. I think with the stigmas around who uses it, what they use it for. My dad died from cancer recently, and I asked his doctor about cannabis usage, and he was like, no. So, but he did it anyway. But there's still a lot of conversational knowledge that needs to be shared.